I'm Dave Garrett. I'm one of the co-founders of Club dVIN. We're a Web3 and wine company mostly focused on investment grade and collectible wines. And our blockchain solution is built to help wineries and wine enthusiasts connect, building communities and using NFTs to offer status incentives and rewards to for wineries to their best customers. So that's kind of the nature of our tech. Club dVIN is a very small membership NFT club that's our early adopters in the space. The wine industry moves slow, so we're starting with a group of early adopters, and that was the event that we had last night in Paris with some of our members that were in town, some of our members that live there, and then some of our members that were in town for the event. Hey, Maureen.
I'm here. Sorry about that.
No, it's no worries. I just introduced myself. Let's let the blockchain folks introduce themselves, and then maybe you can back clean up.
Okay.
All right, Isaac, do you want to go next?
I'm sure. Yeah, so I'm Isaac. I'm a developer primarily in like the DAO space. So I work a lot on different like DAO tooling and community and governance tools. But I also like experimenting a lot with like NFTs, and especially NFTs tied to real world assets or interactive experiences, all sorts of things that are like ways that we can really leverage the medium of blockchain to create unique new experiences. So with dVIN, we've been collaborating for it's been like we'll come up on a year at some point. It's probably been like
close
getting there. So like we've been just collaborating on these different ideas of how these two worlds can connect. And something that I've just really enjoyed here is like the beyond using blockchain for things like supply chain and stuff, which is all like very cool. There's also so much more we can do around like blockchain for like experience tracking, like proofs of like POAPs, or people collect these POAPs of like proofs of doing certain things, and then you can always see like who you were with when and who drank what when. And there's so much we can do with like physical tangible things and experiences with blockchain, which is what I find very exciting. And so previously throughout the last year, I've done some experiments. Like we created a DAO that purchased a warehouse full of whiskey to age as a DAO, to think maybe we can make a DAO owned brand. We've done some experiments with like collectible things, with art, and now the main thing has been wine and these like proofs of experience. So I'm very excited to be experimenting in this space with the dVIN folks.
Thanks, Isaac. Binay, can you provide a quick intro? I just read your background on the website, and you had a pretty interesting background.
I've done a lot of things over the years. I used to be a kind of disaster relief consultant for the military, tech in the 1990s. First year being paid 100% in anonymous digital cash was 1999.
Wow.
So yeah, way back in the generation one cypherpunk. There's a quick summary. And I now run a company called Materium. And Materium is basically a sort of legal trust layer for NFTs that bind to physical things. So it's a way of taking 4, 5, 6 different kinds of expertise and knowledge, combining them into a set of legal rights, bundling the legal rights as an NFT, and then when you buy the NFT, you get legal reliance on all those underlying opinions. We work very closely with the UK Jurisdiction Task Force, which is a legal machinery set up by the UK judiciary, and contributed to the UK digital dispute resolution rules. And we were the first company in the UK to do live transactions under those rules. So we have very good ties with the kind of legal system. So this stuff is all kind of enforceable. And the goal state is a situation where you buy an NFT and you get exactly what you paid for. And we just offer that as a service to people that are doing physical NFT projects. So
that's great.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
And you guys just did a deal, if I read correctly, with my old friend Paul Hammond at IG Wines in London.
Yep, exactly. We're co-developing a product together, which will be a set of investment grade wines as NFTs. And we would expect those to be sort of bought and sold using standard NFT platforms. because with all of this stuff, we think the the hard part of this stuff is making sure that the wine that you're getting is real, right? Like
Sure.
that is, that's the first hard problem. The second hard problem is figuring out who you're going to sell it to. So we can help with the first hard problem, and then the IG Wines folks, Paul's expertise is the second problem of, like, now that we have the genuine article, how do you find the right buyers for it, and how do you bring it to market?
Right. Well,
We're very
speaking
much-
of that, speaking of that first problem, we should let me introduce Maureen, who probably knows more than anyone on the planet about counterfeit and fraud and wine fraud. One of the 50 most powerful women in wine. Is that right, Maureen?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. So, yeah, that's a good one. I've also been called the Sherlock Holmes of wine, and my latest title, which is I think my favorite, is I'm the godmother of authentication. So I've been trying to, I am known for, being an expert in authenticating fine and rare wine. And I've been known for that for almost 20 years. And what I've always been looking for is a solution to be able to determine, how to prove that a wine is authentic and or counterfeit, but then how to have that move forward, so that every single time, a vintner or an auction house or a consumer comes across a bottle, they don't have to have it re-authenticated. So when I learned about the blockchain in 2017, I started this kind of a two-pronged approach where we now have a tech company. So Shea Consulting is my consulting company where we manage fine and rare wine collections. And then Shea Vault is our blockchain-based authenticity and provenance. And what we've been able to do is, we've got a couple innovations, like we have a capsule through which a chip can be read. And we put these bottles in the blockchain so that you can actually see an online ledger of authenticity and provenance that is blockchain secured, that shows a picture of the bottle and gives you all the provenance information on that bottle. It updates with each sale. And the really fun part is that we also put a space on there for there to be a URL, for marketing, because that's what, when I was developing this, that's what the producers were interested in. But we've now figured out that working with Club dVIN, we can layer an NFT right on that ledger of authenticity and provenance. So, and that's perfect, because then we come full circle. So we're showing the potential buyer the authenticity and provenance of the bottle prior to purchase, which is when you need it. Because if you have to be close enough to scan the bottle, it's too late, you've already bought it. But then we can layer this experience on it that, that you guys have been talking about, which I think is so important, because, moving forward, it's all going to be about experiences. And, this is going to allow greater oversight. It allows transparency. Wine is really the most opaque of all industries. People don't walk into an auction house with $30 million worth of jewelry and not have anybody ask a question. So I think that we're all bringing a great transparency, and I love what Club dVIN is doing in terms of consumer interaction and allowing people to have kind of that library of fun that they can revisit and they can share.
Thanks for that, Maureen. So today, just let me throw out a couple of quick things. First of all, we're gonna try to keep the focus fairly narrow on how the blockchain can provide interesting and useful and actionable data to winemakers. I think that's kind of one of the most interesting benefits for winemakers. So I kind of want to go through, and I've got a few things that I want to talk about there. As we go, please, all three of you, feel free to jump in the conversation. I think this should be a conversation more than anything else, where I can try to moderate to the best of my ability. And anybody out in the audience, please feel free to ask questions. You can jump in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to answer questions in real time. Don't worry about saving them to the end. We've got some experienced panelists here. I think we can keep our train of thought. So let me just start by saying, the first piece of data that I think is interesting for winemakers, as many of wine for the industry's, some people say 8,000 years old, but for a very long time, up until today, really, when you sell your wine, it's like a black box. It leaves the winery and it's gone, and you really don't have any idea where it is. There's a couple of things that have been introduced. There are some QR codes, and I remember sitting and talking to Chateau Angelus, and them trying to piece together where their wines are with like Instagram posts and maybe the occasional scan of a QR code, and then some reports from their distributors, and really having no interesting data at all. And this is one of the oldest, most successful, most famous houses in Bordeaux, and they don't know anything about where their wine is, and they're one of the advanced ones. Right. So Maureen, well, can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. So this is actually really interesting. So a lot of bottles out there are serialized and they have serial numbers, but the problem is, no matter how old these and how established these producers are, and I can think specifically about some of the absolute top producers in Burgundy, as well as the absolute top producers in the Napa Valley. They may have their bottles serialized, and they may know that they sent serial numbers, 0 through 1055 to the United States of America, and they've got it in a little notebook, and it's handwritten, and that's it, And then there are other guys who, there's one very famous vintner that when he wants to figure out where a particular bottle is supposed to be, he looks through his FedEx records to find out where he sent what serial number. So when we've got, and this comes up when you have questions of authenticity, where you have a bunch of bottles being offered perhaps in Asia, and the producers, and so we go back to the producers and say, okay, we've got issues because these bottles are in Asia, but I believe they should be in New York City, and all they have are these little handwritten notes. So, being able to give these people who are, a lot of people don't realize most wine producers are farmers at heart. These are people who have their hands in the dirt. They're not techies. Email is a challenge for a lot of them. So, being
I've been
able
telling
to
our
have,
tech team that the wine industry has single-handedly kept the clipboard industry alive for the last 15 years.
Yeah, well, and that is exactly what I'm saying. There's a clipboard of a particular vintage, and all of the FedEx account, all the FedEx slips are on that clipboard, and that's what they go to, and that's exactly it. So, I think the blockchain really allows for there to be, oversight into the primary market. But also, one of the issues, when I was in auctions in New York in 2000, the guy who got all of the Super Tuscans, that Ornellaia, Sassicaia, Celaya, Teg, in Germany, would turn around and sell them at auction in New York City. Well, those producers have an allocation that's supposed to go to Germany to help support their brand. And through the use of blockchain ledgers, and allowing the producers to see where these NFTs are and who's spending them, and or our ledger of authenticity and provenance, where they can see where bottles are sold, is really going to give producers more control over where their bottles go. And I think that's exciting because they want to make sure they're doing the best for their brand.
Sure. So Bine, one of the things that it feels like your platform is really focused on trading. And, one of the things, another one of the things that we talk to the wineries about is not only do they not know where their bottles are, and a lot of times those bottles will be out in the marketplace for 15 or 20 years. And on average, an investment grade wine will trade 3 to 4 times before the final consumer. Most, unless it's sold at auction at something that's high profile, the winemakers don't even know when their bottles are changing hands. So can you talk a little bit about how that kind of data, not only how the blockchain can help provide that data to winemakers, but also how it is useful and actionable?
Yes. So The first thing I should say is I'm by no means a wine specialist, but we've listened closely to our customers. I can give you some model of how this works. So the first thing is the best provenance for a bottle of wine, as far as I understand it, is that it's still sitting in the cellars of the folks who made it, right? And
100%.
For wine which is not going to be drunk for a while, if it can change ownership multiple times without having to leave that cellar, this is kind of the best of all possible worlds.
100%.
Right? And that's pretty easy to arrange with NFTs, right? You issue an NFT at the beginning of the process, directly issued by the seller, by the vineyard. The NFT bounces around across multiple owners. At some point, somebody walks it back in, KYC, AML, whatever identity checking has to be done, or you have to have a kind of magic circle of people that are allowed to buy and sell in that circuit. Depends on your situation. And then they have the right to take physical delivery of the wine. Once they take physical delivery of the wine, at that point, I would tend to say burn the NFT, and kind of after that, you're on your own, because at that point, authentication becomes a dramatically harder problem, right? If you have kind of chips on your bottles and maybe some kind of tamper-proof housing, maybe it can be extended a little past that. But, I heard a fantastic horror story from somebody about a very large sale of wine in a very hot country for about 20% of what you would have expected to pay for it because they'd had an air conditioning failure.
Yeah, sure.
So
well, and what's the most scary thing about that, Vinay, is that the people might have known, the first people who bought the wine after that, situation, realized that the wine might have been problematic. But I would put everything I own on the fact that at least some portion of that wine was then turned around and resold to other markets.
So for a lot more money.
Yep.
And without
I've actually seen that.
So one thing you said, Vinod, about ending the blockchain experience after the wine leaves the warehouses, that's something that we're actually dealing with at Club dVIN, and maybe Isaac, you can talk a little bit about how we're solving that. Maybe it's the last mile problem, but then also the kind of experience and proof of experience issue. Isaac?
Sure. So, yeah, like we were saying earlier, it's like I don't think necessarily what is like the digital quirks like are there's so much to that supply chain authenticity problem, but to me, like what the actual last mile of having the winemaker understand who's actually opening their bottle is I think really interesting and what we've been primarily working on, which is like when you actually have a bottle that you can authenticate with some sort of app, whether it's through some sort of like RFID signature, NFC signature, or even just some sort of like QR code hidden on the bottom of a cork, which I always thought was kind of like a cool low tech maybe solution to show something that only is possible once you actually open a bottle. Then there's the opportunity to actually share with the people that you're with, and so that in doing that in a way that's not obtrusive to the experience has also been interesting to play with. Like in our earliest experiments, just sitting around like a dining table, taking photos of wines and minting like actual POAPs on the POAP website. We were thinking it was actually kind of fun to think about like how can we take photos from the night, photos from the experience, and then like commemorate them so that we could all remember what we drank, remember who we were with, but then also have some way for the winemaker to be like, okay, who in what context are my wines actually being enjoyed? So that's a big part of the experience that we've been developing, which is the actual like on your phone declaring, okay, I'm now opening this bottle, and these are the people I'm sharing it with.
While you're talking, I'm just gonna show off some of the tasting tokens. I'm sorry, go ahead, Maureen.
No, so I just think this is again, it's coming full circle in a really fun way in terms of the fact that these collectors can have, a digital vault of their collections, and the bottles don't have to move from person to person like Vinay was talking about. They can know that their bottles are authentic and have this, digital cellar of all the wines that they have, but then they can have the experience with the NFT and they have a digital cork with Club dVIN, and then that moment doesn't die. The bottle isn't, gone forever. You now have a digital library of everything that you've been drinking. And I you know, to be able to add, this is who I was with, here's a picture of us. It's just brilliant. And, you know, for producers to see people who are truly enthusiastic about their wines versus people who are buying them and flipping them is so powerful.
And I'm
And
sure
Maureen,
seeing
there's actually, I'm sorry, go ahead, Isaac.
I was gonna say, yeah, and actually having them, I'm sure that I bet as a producer, it'd be pretty fun to see like an actual video snapshot of the event, like when it gets opened and shared with a group. At the event in New York that we did recently, we actually did an experiment where like these are all very nicely produced, these like beautiful tasting tokens. We made this one that was like perhaps less professional looking, but it was actually a photo of like a guy at the event holding the bottle and like me with my laptop, like that one. So like at some point we will make this like a much more like cinematic one, but this is an actual like capture in the moment time where we just like whipped out the laptop and like, can we make a tasting token right now of something? So I just there's also like and that's why this is kind of one that I go to, because like, yes, it doesn't look nearly as nice as the other ones, but there's something cool about like just us standing around at the end of the night finishing off the bottles.
Well, and imagine if somebody was getting engaged and the producer gets to know that you chose their wine for that special occasion. Like, that's so cool.
And with regards to that, actually, let me swing back around to you, Maureen. Like, you know, it's fun. The tasting tokens are fun, and it's certainly great to have that experiential piece. But one of the reasons that we created the tasting tokens, the incentive for us was to be able to know how many bottles of a particular vintage of a particular wine are still in circulation. Because every time you mint a tasting token, that means you're opening that bottle.
Yep.
And that means that there's one less bottle out there. Can you talk a little bit about how that data is valuable to winemakers?
Well, I mean, I think it's valuable to everybody in the you know, in the chain. It's valuable to the winemakers to know how much of their wine is being consumed in what areas, you know, who are really the people drinking it versus the people who might be trading it. And it'll give them oversight into what people are drinking and when. You know, are they listening to certain critics and holding off on drinking certain wines, or are they not? And there's so much data that right now producers have absolutely zero knowledge of, other than what people are telling them. And people tend to tell the producers what they think the producers want to hear to get more wine. But if people could, you know, if true collectors and true lovers of the wine were known to the producers, as opposed to like, you know, the big lumber guys of New York who are drinking a beautiful old bottle of wine after 47 other bottles and being assholes and talking about hookers, then, you know, the producer might be like, okay, that's not necessarily a group of people I want to be, you know,
associated with my brand. Yeah.
With. So I think that there are so many ways in which this can help. But for me, it really is about understanding the primary market versus the gray market, you know, versus the black market. You know, when you have an allocation, there are major producers who don't give allocations to entire countries or entire cities. Like there's a Bordeaux producer that for several years would not sell their wine in Las Vegas. They wouldn't give any of their wine to Nevada. There's a major Burgundy producer who stopped selling to Germany for many years because their German importer would turn around and sell the wine on the gray market. So I think that to empower the producers to have oversight and some control over that is really, you know, I think it's going to change the way that wine is traded. And also something that Vinay said is very important. You know, immediate provenance is the most important. And if we can take a lot of these wines that really shouldn't be drunk for 10 years and put them somewhere and not have to physically trade the bottles. And this is going to take some changing of laws. Like in New York, you cannot, you know, the reason nobody auctions futures is that you have to have physical possession of the property in order to represent it for sale. So perhaps with smart contracts, you know, with blockchain contracts, that can change, where if you have the blockchain contract, you know, and the current owner is releasing the bottle for sale, that can be good enough. You don't have to actually ship this bottle all over the world. And that would be game changing.
Let me actually just level set really quickly with everybody, and I should have done this in the beginning. So the market that we're talking about, so the wine industry in general is about $400 billion a year. It's a very, very large, very atomized market. What we're talking about is a sliver of it, really. The investment grade and collectible wine space is about $3 billion a year. It's still an awful lot of wine, but it's about $3 billion. But what's interesting about it is, and you would classify investment grade or collectible wine as wines that you expect to increase in value, right, after you buy it. So, and those wines will typically trade between 3 and 4 times over a period of around 15 years on average, from the time they leave the winery to the time they're consumed. So that it's kind of an interesting market. What I find to be fascinating about it is that the primary market for investment grade and collectible wines every year is about $3 billion. The secondary market is $4 billion. So they make a lot more money, and that's only what we know, right?
That's only what we know, because you have to remember, you know, there is a hell of a lot of transactions out there. The World Health Organization, the WHO, says that 25% of all wines and spirits are illicit, which means they're either counterfeit or they are being traded in a black market. You have something like this theft of wine from the Spanish restaurant, right? Those people stole
they got
70
caught.
bottles. Yeah, I know. They got arrested
yesterday.
I know. Mexican beauty queen, who'd have thunk? So apparently, or not apparently, I believe that a lot of those sales, those bottles are stolen to order. And it's some broker somewhere that sends an email to somebody and says, hey, you know, I've got these wines for sale, and that goes to another broker, goes to another broker. Those kinds of trades don't get counted in that $4 billion. So there's a whole lot of trades that are going on that don't go through markets that are taxable, I think that in reality, that number is about 25% higher.
You know, there's another interesting piece to that. And Vinay, one of the things that we haven't brought up at all that is a huge benefit to winemakers is the royalty that can be attached to a smart contract. Vinay, can you talk a little bit about that? Do you folks use royalties on the NFTs that you build in the space?
Sure. We do something which is a little right. Let's only put on my amateur lawyer hat here. So the way that we sort of think about this is that we don't actually represent facts inside of our system. We don't have a notion of anything being true or not true. What we do have is people that will absorb liability if something is not the way that it's meant to be. So in the situation where you have this kind of perfect provenance, comes from this vineyard, it's in our cellar, here's an NFT, it's essentially a warehouse receipt, knock yourself out. In that situation, there's very, very, very little ambiguity. The NFT changes hands. Nobody is assuming new liability because the thing is still in the custody of the primary producer. That's a kind of base case. And you could pay some kind of small warranty in that kind of situation. But it is, you know, essentially a sort of customary fee at that point. The place where the warranty stuff really comes into its own is when you're dealing with wines which are not in the custody of their primary producers. So somebody comes in with a, you know, case of, you know, some fancy old vintage and says, hey, this is what I have, you know, yeah, not going to embarrass myself by trying to pick a wine. So here we have a case of, you know, Chateau whatever. And what you can have is multiple experts who will come in to authenticate. So we say this is worth $10,000 a bottle. The case is now $120,000. Somebody says, right, for a fee of $800, I will absorb $35,000 of liability if this case turns out not to be genuine. And every time that NFT changes hands, the person that has bought the NFT pays each one of those experts again, so that these warranties are transferred to the new owner of the NFT. Now, this is a mechanism, right? There's a lot of very complicated economic theory behind this, you know, the market for lemons and the role of insurance in information markets. And, you know, there's a bunch of technical economics behind it. But the upshot of this is that a wine expert can earn residual income from certifying that wines are genuine. And if they are certifying wines which aren't genuine as genuine, when they get caught, they're going to wind up losing their house, because we're dealing with real legal liability at every step. And I think paradigmatically, that approach applies to wine, it applies to fine art, it may apply to fashion, it certainly applies to real estate, because it's a generic risk management methodology for dealing with the authenticity of goods. And what we're using is the power of the blockchain to carry out all of the sort of small payments that have to be made, and proofs of insurance and all the rest of the kind of mechanistic parts of running that complex contracting framework. The blockchain takes the pain out of the mechanistic parts of doing that kind of system.
I have a question.
Please.
How are you sure that the bottle hasn't been emptied and refilled?
So at this point, right, the assumption is that the wine is going to be examined before it goes into a permanent custody setting, right? Somebody is
Right,
going to
but
be
you never,
taking
I mean,
stuff.
unfortunately, the state of counterfeits right now is so high
Yes.
that, and so good. I mean, people have reverse engineered a core event so that you can empty a bottle and refill it, and it's
Absolutely.
perfect.
So this is where the fun begins, right? So your choice at that point is, imagine that you're in the position of being an expert, you're asked to certify.
So this is what I actually do for a living.
Right? Yeah, but precisely, right?
I was going to say,
Hello.
you guys really need to have a conversation, because
Right.
it seems like
This
there's something cool
this
there.
is actually what I do I've got a bottle of 1994 Romane Conti downstairs that a Japanese man just dropped off for me to inspect.
There we are, right? So
I
as
mean,
a
that's
consultant,
literally what I do.
So as a consulting wine detective, right, somebody comes and shows you a bottle, and you decide whether or not you want to buy the liability of this thing being fake or not. So if you look at it and say, okay, this is a sure bet, I'm 100% confident of this, you say, here is my certificate, and every time it changes hands, I will resell the certificate to the next person in line. Have a nice day. If you think it's a marginal case, you could ask for more testing, right? I mean, we have a partner company.
There is no more testing. I'm the end of the road.
At the end of the road, right? See, there we go. Right? But I'm thinking here of things like the laser spectrograph, what a laser plasma.
Yeah,
something like that.
All of that stuff is way too expensive to make it worthwhile. Unfortunately, until we can, find. There's nothing scientific that one can do that is economically feasible, even if you're talking about a $30,000 bottle of wine,
right?
Because they're going to have to destroy the wine in order to test it.
Right, absolutely. So at that point, what we're left with is a very, very simple proposition, which is experts have to decide whether the provenance is good enough for them to take the risk of certifying.
Yeah.
And if the answer is they just won't touch it, then at that point, that stuff is out of the gate.
Right. So that's why we put a chip and a short cap on the bottle so that it can't be opened. And there's a chip and a QR code because I like layers. But for us, the chip is what connects it to the blockchain. The QR code is what links it to the online ledger of authenticity and provenance.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
I feel like there's I'm going to put you guys together. I think that there's some business to be done between the two of you.
Yeah.
Sounds like. In the interim, one of the things that I'm most curious about, going back to the royalty question, the winemakers, the title of this webinar is NFTs for winemakers and how it benefits them. We did some kind of interesting simple math the other day, and if a wine leaves the winery ex chateau for $100 and trades 3 times between the time it leaves the chateau and the time that it's consumed, and each time it doubles in price. So it goes from $100 to $200, $200 to $400, $400 to $800. Right? That's actually not too far off what the averages are. But if you get if the wine producer was to get just a 10% royalty from that, it ends up being $130 of a royalty for that one bottle, which is more than they made off the initial sale. And that to me is really, really compelling. I mean, obviously the data is important, and there's a lot that they can do with that data, whether it's knowing where their wines are in the marketplace, or when and how much they're traded for, or even when they're being opened. that's all great data, but that royalty, those are numbers that you can actually put in your bank account, and I think are really super valuable, and it's a way that I think winemakers can really start to participate in the aftermarket in a way that they haven't been able to before. There's a question here, Isaac. I thought maybe it'd be interesting for you. Jeremy asks, what about wines that are maybe a little bit in a class other than the collectible and investment grade? Your what we consider fine wines. So maybe I got to tell you, I know a lot of people in the business. A $50 wine is a special occasion for almost anybody. So those wines are different from what we're talking about here. But I still think that if you think about the big data aspects, there might be some really interesting corollaries and some interesting valuable or value that can be provided to winemakers for wines at that level that are more mass produced.
Yeah, I think that there is a huge opportunity there, because like not everybody is like primarily concerned about the like authenticity of the, I don't know, $1,000 to $1 million bottles of wine, but like there's a lot of information to learn about how people are enjoying wines, and kind of in that category where it makes sense to add some additional technology to the bottles and to the experience, where like maybe they have enough just margins to include that, or maybe like that they see that as something that distinguishes them. I think there's a huge opportunity to add some stuff where it's not saying that like 100% guaranteed, or even like through like indemnified against like lawsuits and stuff, that this is the authentic bottle that was actually opened on this day. But on mass, like when you look at all of the data of people that are opening these wines, maybe in that category, perhaps that's good enough. Perhaps like we don't need to have absolute assurance that that person, like every single person that opened the 10,000 bottles that were produced this year, that every single one was fully authentic. But the trade-off of that is that we can have a lot of interesting stuff about like maybe a slightly lower tech or cheaper way of getting the stuff on the bottle, so that we can start understanding how people are enjoying the wine, who they're opening it with. I think that would be a segment that is like completely different from this like authentication question, and more about just like experience creation. Like maybe it's involved in like going to the winery, and like we're tied to an event space or a specific dinner party or a specific event. Like I think there is a lot to explore there, which is a lot less challenging in a nice way, which is than figuring out the counterfeit problems.
But
I gotta tell you,
in talking to producers, because obviously, this is what we've been doing, right? One of the other issues that the producers have, I mean, obviously, if the bottle is coming from the producer, not every bottle is going to you're not going to need to know the provenance. You're not going to be able to, have to see the provenance chain of a ledger. But the producers that I've talked to, and some of the other applications that we can use using these chips, which is one of the reasons that we use dumb chips, is inventory control. They want to know where their bottles are moving to. And, using a dumb chip, we can scan an entire pallet at a time. And then, when it gets to a casino, you've got inventory control. You just put a strip over a door, and, when something leaves and when it checks back in. So the producers that I've spoken to, that inventory control aspect, and knowing, okay, that these 4 pallets of wine did just check in, in the port of Sydney, and that's where they're supposed to be, great. The other thing that is really important if you're a producer is quality assurance, quality control. If ever there is an issue, they can look and they can immediately know where the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after there's a problem on the bottling line, where those bottles are. So rather than having to recall an entire production or an entire container, they can actually pinpoint, okay, these bottles are at this hotel and that restaurant and this retailer, and we can contact them and tell them that we want these bottle IDs back. And that's really another producer benefit, where they can deal with recalls, because wine recalls happen quite a lot. And they can deal with the recall in a quiet and a targeted way to save tons of money.
Yeah. And they're also, there's a really interesting layer, what we call fine wine, between the kind of mass market wines and the investable, the kind of investment grade collectible wines, that, it's about $70 billion. It's a lot of money that sits in that kind of gray area where you really don't know anything about depletions. Because those wines typically, they're, in the mass market wines, they're going to be purchased and consumed usually within a week, 2 weeks, no more than a month, like for the most part, the vast majority of the wine industry. And for the collectible and investment grade, they know that those are going to lay down for 15 years, right? But that place in the middle, which is actually a really big chunk, that, and a lot of winemakers that we talk to that sell those kind of $50 to $75 wines, they don't have any idea. They have a very, very little data on when those wines are being consumed. If people are laying them down for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, or consuming them right away, or waiting closer to 10 years. And I think having that data would be really important for them to not only know, what the depletion rate is and where they're and what's going on with their wines, but also to start thinking about product development. Because if they're making the wines to be laid down for 10 years, but all of their customers are drinking them after 3, they might want to change their winemaking, or they might want to make some adjustments to their product development. And I think that's a really interesting thing, again,
Well,
at that level.
And you can add to that, in fact, because if the producers have a way, if they can see everybody's digital sellers and they just had a wine and they think it's ready to drink, they could blast out an email to all those people and say, hey, you have this wine, we had it last night, we think it's ready to go. You should think about consuming it in the near future. One of the worst things that I see all the time as I walk into wine cellars, and not all wines are created equal. Not everything is supposed to be kept for 15 years or 5 years. And it sucks when people are using first growth Bordeaux to make spaghetti sauce because they let it, rot. So I think actually the consumer, the producer being able to have that contact, and rather than people constantly saying, well, what does this critic or that critic think? What is the window of drinking? If a producer could actually like blast out to people, hey, we had this last night. I know that you have these bottles in your cellar, drink up. How cool is that?
That's really cool. Oh, well, and even just one of the things that we're doing with Club dVIN is in the feed. If you have a wine in your cellar and someone from anywhere in the world opened the same bottle and vintage, you can get a notification with how that person, like with that person's tasting notes. Obviously anonymized, but you can see it, so you can know, oh, they're happy about how it's showing, or they're not. So like, there's some interesting things that we can do. So we're a little bit over. Let me just say, I'm gonna let everyone kind of sum up or give any kind of closing statement or anything that they want to that they missed saying, and then we'll tie this up. I'll start with Vinay. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you think is important in the data for winemaker space?
So I guess the crux of this is, so one of the asset classes we work with is fine violins, 300-year, 325, 350-year-old instruments. It's a very, very delicate process, taking these very, very old, very valuable items that are embedded in these very complex cultures and then figuring out how to integrate the digital into that story. It's a really fiddly thing. Where you have kind of industrial scale mass production, you can apply sort of, you plug it in over here and you've already got a computer in there with just a bit more digitization. There's a kind of an on-ramping at the kind of industrial level. But it still then also leaves a whole bunch of stuff which is old production, decades back, where you are dealing with the paper ledgers and you are dealing with the kind of, chicken scratches on receipts and stuff like that. And there is an old kind of culture and old trust network that is integral to the trading of those things. So, I mean, you guys are sophisticated, you're not going to make that mistake. But for anybody that's listening is thinking like, oh my God, you're just talking about basically wheeling up a truckload of nerds and throwing away the old culture and replacing it with this kind of digital record keeping.
Yeah.
It can't be like that, right? It cannot do to the wine world what, say, streaming music did to musicians, right? The
Right.
trade-off for the better quality of data cannot be the erosion of important parts of the culture. There has to be this notion that it's genuinely a kind of digital partnership, or what happens is a lot of the value that makes the thing special is destroyed in the process of digitizing it. And that does require the process to be led by folks from inside of the wine world, rather than a kind of, a truckload of ERP nerds.
Speaking of nerds, Isaac, did you have anything that you wanted to add at the end?
Thank you. Let's see. So I would just encourage, I would encourage people to think about like NFTs for more things like beyond supply chain authenticity, because like those problems are so challenging, and I see people solving them, but like that's like, I think there's tons to explore there, and that's what and so I know that like all the dVIN events for now, I can like figure out what fancy bottle of wine I drank that I probably did not appreciate enough. I get a lot of joy from kind of going back and understanding that. So that's what's on my mind.
Well, we drank some at last night. I don't know how they found this, but we drank a bunch of Corton Charlemagne last night, which I know you tasted with Bedad at the event at Dev Connect, and he said that like it blew your mind, like as a white wine that you'd never even considered could taste like that. So we had some last night. I think they might have gotten it for you. So I had them actually bring a couple of bottles, and we're storing them for the next event that you're going to be at.
Oh, awesome! So, thank you very much.
Yeah. No, it's exciting, and it's been. I have to say, it's been really interesting to me to like see you kind of embracing wine and getting into it, and like we were in New York with Isaac for La Pollet, and walking around tasting. Bedad took you around and tasting wines in the best Burgundies in the world.
And now I go to
really
like
fun.
some wine store after. I was like, oh, is that some nice Burgundy tasting event? It seemed nice.
That's great. Maureen, you wanna back clean up?
Yeah, I think I can kind of pile on what Isaac just said, in that although a lot of people think that the authenticity aspect is only for really rare wine, don't forget that a year and a half ago, Yellowtail, London, the UK was awash in counterfeit Yellowtail. So this does affect wines at all levels. And, fortunately, I think, I know our tech can scale so that we can provide very inexpensive, authenticity. But even if it's not, a super fancy NFT, even if it's just a quick, something where a producer can interact with a user, maybe you can't record your own stuff. But I still think that users who are buying entry level and mid-level, wines would benefit from having some sort of, information about the vintage, or the producer telling you what to eat it with, or, just a producer saying, thanks for opening our bottle, I hope you enjoy it. I don't think that has to be something that we keep for only collectible wines. I think that we can, democratize it across the board so that we can really create just a bigger, better user experience with the use of this technology.
100% agree. Hey, thank you, everybody. Thanks everybody for showing up today. We've been recording this, so if you came in late, we'll be posting the recording probably within 2 or 3 days. And so you can go to the website and find the link. Thank you very much, Vinay. Thank you, Maureen. Thanks, Isaac. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And this was a really great conversation. I think we hit on some great topics and some really good stuff to share with winemakers.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Very good. Yeah, you're kind of a legend. Very nice to meet you in person.
Bye-bye.
Bye.